15 years after my husband divorced me and posted an obituary with my name on it, I was standing in the rain outside a shuttered church, holding my teenage son's damp backpack to keep it dry. As I pulled him close, a black car eased to the curb. The door swung open and I stopped breathing. There, under the streetlight, stood my wealthy father-in-law, the man my husband swore had buried me long ago. His eyes searched my face, then my son's, and filled with a grief I didn't understand. He whispered, shaking, You were supposed to be gone. My dear ones, before I share everything, thank you for being here. Your kindness gives me the courage to tell these painful truths. If you're new, please subscribe so you never miss another story of survival, betrayal, and hope. I wish I could tell you that the night was only about thunder and water. It wasn't. It was about ledgers and lies, about a memorial fund dripping out in round numbers, about a name erased with a paragraph online, and a child who shouldn't have to carry any of it. He didn't say anything else, just stood there, soaking wet, looking at my son like he was a ghost from a story someone tried to burn. I didn't move. My arms were still around Caleb's shoulders, but my mind had already left the sidewalk. My legs were numb, but not from the rain. I'd seen ghosts before, when the lights went out during winter, when I saw my own name written in a place it didn't belong. But never like this. Never with someone else blinking back tears like he was the haunted one. And then he opened the back door of the car and said, Please, just come with me. We sat in silence. The leather seat still smelled like the past, expensive, polished, untouched by hardship. Caleb was quiet. He kept glancing at me, waiting for a sign. I didn't give him one. I couldn't. The car pulled away from the curb and the rain hit the windows in hard, scattered bursts. My heart was louder. Every turn of the wheels sounded like a year rewinding, and I was scared, not of him, but of what I might remember too clearly. He didn't ask questions, not yet, just handed me a towel and said we'd be somewhere warm soon. I held it without moving. My hands were stiff, cold, and cracked at the knuckles. Years of dish soap, scrub brushes, and picking coins off gas station floors. I didn't say thank you. I wasn't ready to owe anyone anything again, not even kindness, not even warmth. We pulled up to an old diner off Route 7, one of those places where the jukebox still works and the waitress knows when not to ask. He asked for corner booth. Caleb slid in first, and I followed. He sat across from us, adjusting his wet coat like he wasn't used to wearing anything uncomfortable. Then he reached into a folder and pulled out a piece of paper. This, he said, sliding it across the table, was dated 3 weeks after your divorce. I looked down and saw it. My name, in bold on an obituary, a real one, like I had already been buried and everyone had moved on, like I was just a closed chapter with no sequel. I didn't touch the paper, I just stared. There it was, my name, my age, a made-up cause of death, and a line that said, She will be dearly missed. Missed by whom? He cleared his throat. I never saw this until 2 nights ago. A volunteer sent it to me, thinking I'd already known. I hadn't. His voice cracked slightly, but he steadied it like a man used to fixing his own guilt. And that boy, he looked at Caleb. I didn't know. Caleb looked between us. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His face said everything. Confusion, curiosity, and that flicker of fear I hadn't seen since the night I told him we couldn't go back to the shelter anymore. My voice finally came back. Barely. You really didn't know? I asked. All these years, and you believed him? His jaw clenched. I did. He showed me pictures, a grave, said you left a note, said you didn't want to be found. I nodded slowly. And you never asked questions? He hesitated. I thought I had no right to. The waitress came over with menus, but none of us looked. I stared at that obituary. I couldn't stop. The font was elegant, the kind they use for weddings and deaths, because either way, someone's life changes. I remembered the day I found it. Someone at the shelter slipped it under our door, probably thinking they were helping. Caleb was 3. He thought it was a birthday card. I laughed then, the kind of laugh that sounds like a scream with manners. He pushed another envelope across the table. Open it when you're ready. It's not legal stuff, just records, bank statements, things that didn't make sense until now. I didn't reach for it, not yet. I wasn't sure I wanted to see what part of my life had been erased in numbers. Why now? I asked, and why tonight? He looked at Caleb again. Because I saw handwriting on a delivery receipt last week. It matched a recipe card your mother wrote in 1985. I don't forget things like that. That shook me, not because it was sweet, but because it meant someone had been paying attention all along, just not to me. And you followed it? I said. A signature? He nodded. And a gap in the fund's ledger, round numbers, always $1,000, always on the same day each quarter, like someone's scheduling guilt. My stomach tightened. I knew that schedule. Those were the days I received anonymous donations, the ones that kept us just above drowning. He leaned back. So I kept digging. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in shame. I found invoices, missing receipts, and signatures that didn't match. And then I found this. He tapped the obituary again. And I realized maybe the dead weren't the only ones buried. I finally took the envelope. My fingers shook, not from fear, but from fury. Not at him, at how easily a name can vanish when no one's watching, at how the truth can go out like a light with one fake eulogy and a man too proud to double-check the bulb. Caleb tugged my sleeve gently. "Mom," he whispered, "are we going home?" I didn't know how to answer, not yet. I looked back at the man across from me. My ex-father-in-law, the only one who still called me by my real name. He said quietly, "If you let me, I'd like to make this right." I studied his face, the wrinkles, the weight of regret sitting just above his collarbone. I didn't say yes, I didn't say no, but I opened the envelope. The envelope wasn't sealed, just folded once and taped, as if someone had opened it before and didn't want to admit it. Inside were 8 printed statements, 8 pieces of paper, plain white, no logos, no letterhead, just rows of numbers, dates, amounts, recipients. The same 4-digit figure repeated every few months, $1,000, $1,000, $1,000, neatly deposited into a private account under a generic name. Caleb didn't notice, or maybe he pretended not to. He focused on the ketchup bottle, spinning it slowly between his palms. But I was staring at the numbers like they were confessions, because I recognized the dates. They lined up with things: rent, shoes, medicine. One time, we got locked out of the shelter after curfew. It made me sick, not just because it meant someone was watching, but because it meant someone was deciding how much suffering we could afford. They hadn't saved us. They'd managed us, like a budget, like a tax deduction in the shape of a mother and son. I looked up. He was watching me carefully, not scared, measured, like he knew what was coming and wanted to absorb the blow before I threw it. "So what do you want from me?" I asked. "An apology?" He shook his head. "No, just your trust. Eventually." Trust. What a strange request after a fake death and 15 years of silence. My chest burned with all the words I didn't say. You didn't look for me. You believed him. You cashed checks in my name like I was a ghost worth monetizing. But I bit them back. I didn't want Caleb to hear them that way. So I said, "Let me ask you something. Did you ever once wonder how a woman could die without a body, without a death certificate, without a single phone call from a hospital?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, but grief is a selfish thing. I wanted to believe she was gone because it hurt less than asking where she really was." There was something in his tone that stopped me. Not quite regret, something older, more resigned. He wasn't used to being wrong, and now confronted with undeniable evidence, he wasn't looking for redemption. He was just tired. "You said you found a pattern," I said, changing the subject. "In the payments?" He pulled a notepad from his coat. It was small, leather-bound, the kind men like him used for golf scores and Scotch notes. But he had names, handwritten, sloppy, underlined in red. 3 accounts, all routed through a nonprofit called Heartfold Trust, registered in Delaware. I blinked. "That's the foundation that ran the shelter." "Exactly," he said. "And guess who sits on their advisory board?" I didn't have to guess, I knew. The same man who wrote my obituary. Caleb spoke finally, quiet, hesitant. "What's happening?" I reached across the table and touched his hand. "Something big, baby. Something bad that someone didn't want us to find." He nodded, didn't ask more. That was the thing about growing up poor. You learn early not to push for answers when grown folks lower their voices. I turned back. "And you think my name was used? How?" He hesitated. "To build a campaign, donations, sympathy dollars, a memorial scholarship. You were worth more to him dead than you were alive." The air inside the diner thickened, not with smoke, not with food, with memory. My hand clenched around the paper again. And now? I asked. Now that you know. He exhaled slowly. Now I tell you that your son is heir to half of everything I built, whether your ex-husband agrees or not. My stomach turned. He'll fight it. Let him. He said it like it was already done. He's made himself too rich on silence. Its time noise did something good. I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, not from anger, but from the sudden weight of being believed. For years, I screamed in my head and begged through locked windows. And now, someone had heard me. Too late, too far, but still. He stood up, left a bill on the table like a man trying to buy back dignity. Then he looked at Caleb. You like basketball? Caleb nodded. Good, come by tomorrow. The court's still there. He paused, then said to me, I'll wait, whether you show up or not. When he left, I let myself exhale. It was shaky. Caleb leaned on my shoulder. Are we rich? He whispered. I almost laughed. Not yet, and not in ways that count. He nodded again, not disappointed, just 13 and used to answers like that. We sat there for a while. The rain had stopped, but the puddles outside shimmered like the ground was still remembering it. The next morning, I didn't go to the court. I walked past it, twice. From across the street, I saw a man sweeping rainwater off the lines like the game was still on. I couldn't bring myself to wave. Not yet. Instead, I took Caleb to school, then rode the bus to the downtown library. I hadn't used a computer in months, maybe years, but I still remembered how to search, how to dig. My fingers hovered over the keyboard longer than I'd expected. What did I even type? My name, his, Heartful Trust? I tried all three, and then there it was, my obituary. It was still up, archived, cached, indexed, a photo I hadn't seen in ages, one he must have taken secretly from a picnic or a church event. It wasn't just any picture. It was the one where I had my hand on my belly. I remember that day. I hadn't told anyone yet, not even him. The text below was simple. Elegant even. Rokhaya Elmsley, beloved wife and community volunteer, passed away peacefully following complications at birth. She is survived by her husband. No public service. My chest tightened. No service. Of course not. No one could show up to a funeral for someone still breathing. I stared at the words until they blurred. Passed away peacefully. I hadn't even screamed. When I left, it was silent. I remember walking through the alley behind our building with nothing but a plastic grocery bag, one pair of shoes, 2 sets of clothes, the cash I'd hidden behind a cracked tile. It wasn't peaceful. It was survival. I printed the page, folded it into quarters, and put it in my coat pocket. Then I pulled up Heartful Trust. Their website was glossy. Lots of smiling kids, words like impact, transformation, and legacy giving. At the bottom, in smaller print, a section labeled In Loving Memory Campaigns. And there it was again. My name, Rokhaya Elmsley Memorial Fund, established 15 years ago, honoring a life cut short but lived with grace. Funds support education and housing initiatives for single mothers. There was even a quote. She gave everything she had to others. It's time we give back. I stared at it. I was a slogan. A tax shelter with a smile, a ghost that paid for his speeches. When I got home that evening, Caleb was already on the steps. His shoes were muddy and his jacket was wet, but he looked taller. Or maybe it was just the way he was holding himself. He was there, he said. Grandpa, he brought me a new ball. Said it was the kind Kobe used in high school. I nodded slowly. Did you play? A little, he watched. Then he told me to come again tomorrow. I didn't know what to say. My instinct was to protect, to pull Caleb back from whatever was unfolding. But part of me knew I couldn't stop it. Blood had its own gravity. That night, I pulled out the obituary and laid it flat on the table. I stared at it while Caleb did his homework. Do you remember anything about when you were a baby? I asked suddenly. He blinked. Like what? Anything strange, people visiting, men in suits. He shook his head. No, just you. We moved a lot, I remember that, but you always made it fun. I smiled, even though it broke me a little. You remember the time I made a tent with the sheets in that church basement? Yeah, he grinned. You said it was a fort and we were knights. I looked at him for a long time. He didn't know, not really. He didn't know what I gave up to keep that smile. What I buried, what I let die, I barely slept. The next morning I walked to the court again. This time I stopped. He was already there, dressed in a tracksuit too clean for real use, sipping coffee from a metal thermos. He didn't act surprised to see me. "You look like her," he said, "the woman in the photo." I narrowed my eyes. "The one you used without asking?" "The one I regret looking at more than once." He gestured to the bench. I sat reluctantly. He pulled out a folder thinner than before, just one sheet. "I thought you should see this." I opened it. It was a birth certificate, Caleb's, but the father's name wasn't blank. It had been filled in, then blacked out with thick marker. I traced the line. "Who did this?" "Your husband, or someone he paid, but the original still exists. I'm trying to get it." The idea hit me like cold water. If that line had never been erased, if my name had never been crossed out from every record, maybe things would have been different, but maybe not. Because monsters don't need permission, just access. He leaned closer. "I know it doesn't fix anything, but I want you to know I didn't agree to what he did. I just believed him when he said you were gone. And I hated him more for it when I realized I wanted to believe it." I didn't answer. I just folded the paper and slid it into my bag. He didn't press me. When I got home, Caleb was waiting on the stairs again, this time with 2 bags. "He gave me shoes," he said, "and said we should come to dinner tomorrow at his house." I blinked. "He invited us?" Caleb nodded. "He said there are things you need to see. Things he kept." I didn't like it. Not the way he said kept. Not the sound of secrets finding their way back into the light. But I also knew. I had no choice. Some ghosts don't go away until you meet them where they live. I stood outside the gate for 5 whole minutes. Caleb was already halfway up the steps, bouncing a little, from foot to foot, like he'd been there before, like it felt safe. I wasn't sure what unnerved me more, the house, the fact that it hadn't changed at all, or the way my son smiled at the door before I even rang the bell. He answered himself. Charles, my ex-father-in-law. Not a butler, not a housekeeper, just him, standing there in a wool vest and pressed shirt, as if this were a regular Tuesday. As if inviting the dead back for dinner wasn't the kind of thing that needed explanation. He gave me a nod, nothing more. Then he turned to Caleb and smiled like they'd known each other longer than 2 afternoons. "Come in," he said. I followed. The smell hit me first. Polished wood, lemon wax, and something sharp like old paper. It was the smell of a home where nothing had been thrown out for decades, where grief lived in the linen closets and behind the portraits. I caught sight of one, my wedding photo, framed, still on the wall. I paused. He noticed. "I never took it down," he said simply. "There was nothing to replace it with." I didn't know what that meant, but I let it go. Caleb was already exploring, eyes wide. This place was a castle to him. We sat in the same dining room where I'd once been toasted by family I never saw again. The table was set for 3. The silverware gleamed. The napkins were real. For a moment, I could almost pretend this was a reconciliation. But then I saw it on the sideboard, an old tin box I hadn't seen in 20 years. Charles caught my glance. "You recognize it?" I nodded. "That box belonged to your wife. She kept all the boys' drawings in there. So I thought, maybe it was time you took it." I blinked. I didn't expect him to use the word "you" like that, like I still had a claim to anything. I opened it slowly. Inside weren't drawings. There were letters, dozens, all addressed to me, none ever sent. The handwriting was familiar, my son's. Only the dates were recent, the last 2 years. Pages and pages, folded neatly, written on loose leaf and notebook paper. I looked up. "He started writing to you on his own. After his mother passed. I guess..." He had questions. I froze. "His mother, you mean?" "The woman your ex married," he said carefully. "Your friend. She died 2 years ago. Cancer." I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt nothing. Another part felt too much. Charles didn't press. I pulled one letter out and unfolded it. It started with, "Hi, Mom." I couldn't breathe. Caleb came back into the room just then, holding a basketball signed with gold ink. He sat beside me, chattering about the gym and the garage and the weight bench. I barely heard him. I was stuck on those letters, on what it meant that someone had been letting my son grieve a mother he thought was gone, while I was right there, living blocks away. After dinner, Charles gestured toward his study. I followed, feeling every step like a descent into something old and unfinished. The walls were lined with books I used to dust. On the desk, a folder sat open. I knew better than to reach for it. He motioned for me to sit. I stayed standing. You need to see this, he said. His voice had changed, softer, maybe even fragile. I finally sat. He pushed the folder toward me. Inside were court documents, bank statements, a trust document, and at the bottom, a notarized declaration of death. My own, dated 12 days after I left. He watched me read. I asked him why. Because he had to, he said. He needed you gone, and the courts needed a reason not to pursue support. So he manufactured your death. Quietly, paid a clerk. Filed it out of state. I didn't believe him at first, but the seal was real. The notary's name matched the county records. It was legal, he never told me, Charles added. Not then. I found out later by accident, and by then the damage was done. I felt cold. The room seemed to shrink. And Caleb, I tried to find you, he said, twice. Once, 5 years ago, when the trust was audited, but you were off the grid. I didn't know where to start. I leaned back in the chair, my fingers on the fake death certificate. So what do you want now? I asked. He hesitated. To fix what I can. Why? Because he's not here anymore, and because the boy deserves more than a ghost for a mother. I didn't answer. I stood up and walked to the door. But just before I reached it, I turned back. If you really want to fix something, I said, don't just give me letters and paper. Give me my name back. He nodded slowly. That's already in motion. I've hired someone. They're working to reverse the declaration. It takes time. Time. That's all anyone ever offered me. And now suddenly everyone wanted to return what they'd taken. Back in the foyer, Caleb was waiting with his backpack and that glow that only comes from feeling seen. He looked up at me and asked, Can we come back on Friday? He said he wants to show us some photo albums. I didn't know what to say, so I nodded. We'll see. On the ride home, I read more of his letters. One talked about a science fair. One asked why I never wrote back. One said he saw my face in a dream and I was laughing. I cried in silence. That night, I couldn't sleep. The tin box was on my table. I opened one of the folded papers at the bottom. It was dated the week before we met Charles at the court. It said, I don't know if you're out there, but if you are, I think I'd recognize you. I think I already have. My hands trembled. I thought I had made peace with being erased, being a shadow. But I hadn't, not really. Because in his handwriting, I found the thing no one else had ever given me. Proof that I still mattered. And in Charles's eyes, I saw the thing I'd been waiting for, even if I didn't know it. Remorse, not guilt. Guilt is noisy and temporary. Remorse lingers. It watches you open old letters in silence. And maybe that was the beginning of something, or the start of another lie. I didn't know, but I was finally ready to find out. 2 days later, I sat in the Social Security office with a number in my hand and a knot in my stomach. The woman behind the glass had kind eyes, but her voice was all policy. She took my form, scanned her computer, then stopped. Her brows pulled together. I'm sorry, ma'am. According to this, you've been deceased since 2011. I nodded. I'm aware. But you're here. Very much so. She didn't laugh. I didn't blame her. This wasn't the kind of thing they trained for. She disappeared into the back with my file. I waited for 20 minutes, staring at the flickering light above window 3, wondering what else had vanished with my name. When she came back, she said I'd need to provide 2 living witnesses and 3 certified documents verifying identity. Birth certificate, old ID, marriage license. I almost laughed. The first 2 were in a box somewhere, and the last one was used to wipe me off the books. I thanked her, left with a list, and stood in the parking lot, breathing heavy like I'd just run a mile. Caleb was at school. I didn't want him to see me unraveling. I called Charles. He picked up on the first ring. Did they believe you? Sort of. They believe I exist. They just don't believe the record does. He offered to help, said he still had a copy of the marriage certificate, maybe even a joint tax return. I didn't like relying on him, but I hated the idea of this erasure continuing even more. That night, I took Caleb for burgers. He talked about school and his science project. He said Charles had promised to take him to the local planetarium. I tried not to flinch. He noticed. You okay, Ma? Yeah, just tired. You don't like that he likes me, do you? That hit me. It's not that. It's just, I missed too many years. I want every minute now. He looked down at his fries. You still get 'em. On Friday, Charles came by with a folder. It had everything, a copy of our joint tax return from 2009, an old rental agreement with both our signatures, and miraculously, my hospital ID badge from when I worked nights as a nursing assistant. I stared at that photo. Younger me, hopeful, naive, I barely recognized her. He also brought an envelope, handwritten, addressed to me. I opened it. Inside was a letter from my ex-husband, dated 6 years ago. It wasn't apologetic. It was a legal statement. He'd written it to protect himself. In it, he acknowledged our marriage, our separation, and that he hadn't heard from me since 2010. No mention of a death, just an absence. For the record, it said, should anything arise? I felt sick. Charles said he found it in an old safe deposit box after his son's death. He wasn't sure if it would help, but I could feel something shift. Maybe the system didn't need a resurrection, just a loophole. The next morning, I returned to the office with the documents. A new clerk this time, less kind, more skeptical. She examined everything. Then she looked at me hard. If you are who you say you are, she said, you've been collecting benefits under a false name. I froze. I haven't collected anything. According to the record, someone did. I left with a case number and a warning. Someone had used my death for money. A benefit claim had been paid out in 2012. I knew then this wasn't just a lie. It was theft. Back home, I paced. The lights buzzed above me. Caleb was at a sleepover. I dug through my old paperwork, what little I had. Nothing showed activity in my name, but someone else, someone with access to my records, had cashed in. I called Charles again. This time, I didn't ask. I demanded. Who filed the death benefits? He was quiet. Then he said, his second wife. She told me it was for funeral costs. I didn't question it. There was no funeral. I know that now. He sounded smaller, older. I felt like the only person in the world still standing from a crumbling house. The next day, I went to the library and requested public financial records. Took hours, but I found it. A payout from a private life insurance policy. My name, listed as deceased. Beneficiary, the woman who used to braid my hair in college. I stared at the screen so long that the librarian tapped my shoulder. When I looked up, my hands were fists. That night, I told Caleb a version of the truth, that his stepmother had made a mistake, that I was trying to fix it. He didn't ask for details. He just said, does that mean you get to have your name again? I smiled. Not yet, but soon. A week later, I got a letter. Official envelope. Return address. SSA. Inside, a single line. Your case is under formal review. Identity confirmation in process. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't silence. Then came the email. From someone I didn't know. Subject line, I think you're looking for me. It was a former clerk, retired. Said she remembered a file being flagged for inconsistencies back in 2012, but it had been overridden. She offered to testify if needed. Said it never sat right with her. I replied immediately, thanked her, told her she might be saving more than just a name, because this wasn't about records anymore. It was about justice, and justice doesn't die quietly. The envelope came in the afternoon mail, thick cardstock with gold edging, no return address. Caleb found it first and handed it to me, smirking like he thought it might be a sweepstakes. I opened it slowly, hands already tensing before I saw the embossed monogram inside, a single C intertwined with a family crest I hadn't seen in nearly 20 years. Inside was an invitation, formal, phrased like a legal summons, dressed up in party clothes. You are cordially invited to the Carlisle Family Foundation dinner in honor of legacy and future. Signed at the bottom, Charles Carlisle III, the name of a ghost who'd only recently remembered I was alive. I stared at it. My palms grew clammy. The event was in 4 days. Dress code formal. Location, their estate. Not a hotel, not a neutral venue. Their house, their rules. And somehow, they wanted me there. Caleb peeked over my shoulder. Are we going? He asked. Not me, It was his family, too, and he knew it. I looked into his eyes and saw the same storm I felt building inside me. We're going, I said, but we're going on our terms. That night, I pulled down the old garment bag from the closet shelf. Inside, the last decent dress I owned. Black, simple, timeless. I hadn't worn it since a funeral I didn't cry at. I held it up to the light. It still fit the shape of a woman I no longer was. I spent the next days preparing, not just my clothes, but my mind. I rehearsed conversations in my head. I imagined their expressions, their gasps, their veiled insults cloaked in charity. Charles would be there. His wife, maybe, their lawyer, almost certainly. What they didn't know was that I wasn't coming for reconciliation. I was coming for answers. The evening of the dinner, Caleb wore the only blazer we owned. He looked taller, older, like he belonged in rooms that had tried to forget him. I slipped the locket around his neck, the one I'd hidden when we first fled. Inside was a photo of him as a baby and a photo of his father. I hated that second image, but Caleb had the right to decide for himself. When we arrived, valet attendants ushered us in with confusion quickly masked by forced politeness. Inside, the hall shimmered with chandeliers. Guests milled around holding glasses of wine worth more than my car. At the center, Charles waited. He greeted us with a practiced smile and the stiffness of a man performing civility. "Rokhaya," he said, nodding. "Caleb." "Welcome," I nodded back. "This feels less like a welcome and more like a test." "Perhaps both," he admitted. "But I assure you, you are not the only one here with something to prove." Dinner was served in a long room with more forks than I knew how to use. We were seated mid-table, far from the head, but not so far that it felt like banishment. Caleb sat to my left. To my right was a woman with silver hair and eyes that tracked every movement. She introduced herself as Eleanor, a board member of the foundation. She said she remembered me. I did not remember her. Conversations buzzed around us, mostly about endowments, real estate, and legacies. I listened more than I spoke. Now and then someone mentioned my name with curiosity. A few whispered, "Back from the dead," like it was a compliment. Halfway through the meal, Charles rose with a glass in his hand. He tapped it gently. The room fell silent. "Friends, family, colleagues," he began. "Tonight we honor legacy, not just the one we inherit, but the one we choose." He went on about vision, future, and responsibility. Then he paused, turned to face me and Caleb. "There is someone here who embodies that choice, someone whose presence reminds us that truth, no matter how long buried, eventually finds its way back to light." My stomach tightened. He gestured toward Caleb. "I would like to formally acknowledge my grandson, Caleb Carlisle, and announce his inclusion in the Foundation's Legacy Scholarship Fund." The room clapped, some genuinely, others politely. I couldn't move. My son looked at me, then at Charles, his jaw clenched. After dessert, I pulled Charles aside. We stood near the grand piano in the foyer, away from the others. "What was that?" I asked. "And a peace offering?" "No," he said, "a public stake. Once the world knows who he is, no one can erase him again. You're not doing this for him. You're doing it for yourself, for your conscience, or your brand." Charles didn't deny it. "Both can be true." "Then I want more," I said, "or not money, not scholarships. I want a name, a record. I want every file that says I'm dead corrected. I want my life back." He looked tired. "It's already started." "What does that mean?" "Check your email tomorrow. The obituary will be retracted, your death undone, publicly." The weight of those words settled somewhere between relief and fury. I nodded, not because I accepted it, but because I needed to breathe. We left early. Caleb didn't speak until we were halfway home. Then he said, "Did you believe him?" "No," I answered, "but I believe in leverage. And now we have some." That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and thought about erasure, about how easy it had been for them to declare me gone, about how long it was taking to be seen again. But I also thought about power, about the kind that grows in silence until it can no longer be ignored. The next morning, the obituary had indeed disappeared. In its place, a small note, "Correction. An administrative error previously listed Rokhaya Carlisle as deceased. This was incorrect." No apology, no admission, but it was something. A few hours later, a reporter called, said she was working on a piece about women whose identities had been stolen by their own families. Asked if I'd be willing to talk. I said yes, because if they could make me vanish with a sentence, I'd make sure my truth lived in paragraphs. I didn't knock, just stood there, backpack damp in my hand, heart hammering like a fist against my chest. 15 years ago, I left this estate behind, buried under a fake obituary and a silence that nearly killed me. Now I was back, not as a beggar, not as a ghost, but as a mother with questions too long ignored. When the door creaked open, Charles looked older, not frail, just worn in a way grief never quite polishes away. I didn't wait for pleasantries. I held out the folder, thick with documents, birth certificates, hospital files, even a faded photo or two. He said nothing, just stepped aside. The study was just as I remembered it. Dark leather, dustless surfaces, a place where secrets settled like mist on old books. I sat without asking. He poured a drink, not offering one. That told me everything I needed to know about how this would go. I started slow. Your son faked my death. He didn't flinch, just sipped. He posted my obituary online, closed our accounts, told everyone I ran off left him. Charles leaned back. He told me you'd died during labor, that you'd gone into the woods hemorrhaged. A park ranger found your scarf, your blood. I laughed. It sounded wrong in that room. I told him everything, the clinic, the name change, the old nurse who took pity on me. How I lived in motels until my son could walk. How I cleaned offices at night and homes during the day. How I homeschooled him when we couldn't afford the bus. I wasn't telling this for pity. I wanted him to feel the weight of it, the choices his son made. He didn't interrupt. He looked at my hands, at my son's photo in the folder, and then he whispered something that cracked the room open. He did the same thing to someone else. The name he gave me was a girl, Elena, 22 now. Said she had dark eyes like mine and a scar on her chin. He'd only met her once. A fundraiser. She introduced herself as his niece, but she wasn't listed in any family records. Just a girl in a red dress who vanished after dessert. I froze. I'd always thought I was the only one, that the cruelty was personal. But maybe to him, women were stories he got to edit, versions he could delete. Charles rubbed his temples. I confronted him once. He said I was old and sentimental, that I didn't understand business. We sat in silence, only the clock ticking like a metronome of regret. I told Charles I wanted more than acknowledgement. I wanted answers, records, access. He nodded, then opened a drawer. He handed me a list, names. Ilana was on it. So were 3 others, all the women I didn't know, all marked with a date, a location, and a donation made in their name. My stomach turned. Memorial fund, I said. He nodded. He said it was for healing, that grief needed purpose. I left with the list and a colder chill than the one outside. I wasn't scared. I was furious, and fear and fury make a woman unstoppable when she's got nothing left to lose. My son deserved truth, not shadows, and if there were other Elenas, they deserved more than being erased by a paragraph online. The world might have forgotten us, but we hadn't forgotten ourselves. That night, I laid the list out on the table like a map of unfinished business. I highlighted Elena's name, Googled every address, cross-referenced every date with newspaper archives. I found an article, car crash, no survivors. But the body was never recovered. The obituary read like mine, hollow, too neat. I bookmarked it. The same phrases kept showing up. Tragic loss, beloved memory, and sudden passing of it, but nothing real. No details, no witnesses, just silence dressed up in formal wear. I didn't sleep. I watched my son breathe, his curls pressed into the pillow, his lips twitching in some dream he'd never tell me about. I thought about telling him everything, about the legacy he didn't ask for, but I couldn't yet. Not until I was sure I could protect him from the worst of it. Not until I could draw a full map, not just scattered pins. In the morning, I visited the library, printed every article, every death notice, every fake obituary. The librarian gave me a look but didn't ask. I guess she'd seen women like me before, quiet, determined, shaking but still standing. Back home, I pinned everything on the wall. Yarn, tape, names, years, like a crime drama, only this wasn't fiction. This was the mess one man left behind while climbing ladders built on the backs of women who trusted him. By dusk, I had enough to feel it wasn't just about me. I called Charles, told him I needed every fund transaction. He didn't hesitate. He said he'd have his assistant send over the files. When I asked why he was helping, he sighed. Because I believed him, and I think some part of me wanted to. I liked the version of events where my son wasn't a monster. That night, I opened the files, and buried between spreadsheets and tax write-offs was a photo of my son, but younger, standing next to a girl who looked just like me. She was smiling. He wasn't. The caption on the back read, "Elena Summer, gone too soon." I stared at it for hours. Then I lit a candle, not for mourning, for memory, because ghosts don't rest when they've been lied about. They rise. Charles didn't offer me a seat, and I didn't ask for one. The foyer smelled like cedar and stale secrets, the kind that settle into the floorboards of old money. I clutched the folder in my hand so tightly that the edges began to curl. My son had stayed behind, as I'd asked. This was a battle I needed to fight alone, not because I wanted to, but because it had to be clean. Charles led me into the study, the same one where he'd once given me a glass of bourbon and warned me not to marry his son. That warning had turned into prophecy. The room looked the same, except now the bookshelves held fewer titles and more framed awards. "He doesn't know I called you," Charles said, closing the door softly behind us. I didn't answer. I opened the folder and laid out the copies of the falsified obituary, the forged medical certificate, the bank records from the memorial fund, and most damning of all, the private investigator's report that confirmed the fund had not only continued but expanded in my name. Charles's eyes scanned the pages with a practiced coldness that reminded me why people called him the Iron Judge back in his federal days. But his fingers trembled. This isn't my doing," he said. "No?" I asked. "Then who's been spending that fund quarterly under the label Widow Recovery Support? Who accessed the trust account 3 months ago to make a payment to a second caretaker?" Charles hesitated, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw fear, not authority, in his posture. He sank into the leather chair behind his desk, rubbing his temple like he was trying to erase a migraine or a memory. "He said you wouldn't want contact. He said you were dangerous, mentally unwell, that you'd threatened the baby." My breath left my lungs like a slap. "You believe that?" I whispered. "After everything?" He looked up then, and I didn't see fear anymore. I saw guilt. I believed what I needed to believe. My son came to me in tears. "He said you'd run off and left a note, that the pregnancy was a lie you clung to, that you were unstable." He sighed. "We were going to commit you, but then you disappeared. I thought—" I stepped back, heart hammering. "You thought I was dead, and you never checked, never once tried to find me, just collected checks in my name?" Charles slammed his palm on the desk. "You think it was that simple? There were threats? Your name was flagged in estate records? We were told you had connections that made it dangerous to pursue. And honestly, I was tired of the mess. I buried it, just like I buried my first wife's scandal. I did what I always do." His voice cracked. "But then you showed up, and he couldn't explain it, and now everything's cracking open." I was silent. Something inside me, some knot that had held me together through years of cold nights and dollar store dinners, started to loosen. "There's more," I said. "A payment went out to a private school under a different name, same birth date as my son, same blood type." "Is there another child?" Charles didn't answer at first. He stared at the folder, then at me. "He had a surrogate arranged, quietly, before your son was even 2. My knees went weak. I grabbed the edge of the desk to steady myself. "He replaced us?" I asked, more to the air than to him. "No," Charles said. "He tried to replicate what he thought he'd lost, but biology didn't matter. That boy doesn't look like him, doesn't act like him. That's why he never acknowledges him in public." I swallowed hard. My fingers were ice cold, but my cheeks burned. So now what? Charles stood slowly, walked to a drawer, and pulled out a key. "This opens a safety box in town. It has letters, medical files, and a recording. I kept it in case things ever got out of hand." I didn't take the key. Not yet. "Why give me this?" I asked. "Why now?" "Because," he said, his voice low and worn, "I'm old. I watched my son turn you into a ghost, and I stood by. And now I see that I raised a man who thinks people are problems to erase. You were never a ghost, Rokhaya. You were the fire he tried to smother." I took the key, hand shaking. "One condition," I said. "If I go down this rabbit hole, I need full access to every account tied to my name, every file, every ledger." Charles nodded. "Done. I'll have my attorney call you by morning." I left the estate with more than a key. I left with leverage, with direction. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a woman trying to stitch her life back together. I felt like a mother stepping into a storm with thunder in her chest. That night, as my son slept, I looked up the address of the safety box. I found the school. I found the name of the other boy. And I found the nurse who used to work at the surrogacy clinic, now retired in a quiet suburb. Each name was a breadcrumb. Each truth is a matchstick. And I was done walking in the dark. It was time to burn a path forward. The moment I stepped into Charles's study, the scent hit me like a wave: cedarwood, old paper, and the faint metallic trace of something I couldn't name. The room hadn't changed since the last time I'd seen it, back when I was still his daughter-in-law, welcomed with wine and soft music. Now it felt like a tomb lined with the remains of lives edited and rewritten. Charles didn't offer me a seat, but I took one anyway, placing my folder on the mahogany desk with a gentle thud. I had spent the whole night reviewing every page: forged affidavits, mysterious bank transactions, and one chilling hospital record marked deceased. I didn't ask him why. I asked him who. He sat across from me, elbows on the desk, fingers steepled. For a long while he didn't speak. Then he said quietly, "We all did what we had to do to protect the name." The name, the family, the image. That was the currency they traded in. Reputation over righteousness, legacy over life. I kept my eyes on him and asked, "Did you know they were using my identity? The death certificate? The fund in my name?" His silence was more damning than a confession. Finally, he nodded. "It started as insurance fraud. Then it became something else. They didn't think you'd survive." I felt it all rise in me. 15 years of being erased, surviving on crumbs and kind strangers, watching my son grow up without answers. And the man who sat across from me, who once gave me a pocket watch on my wedding day and called me daughter, had helped orchestrate my disappearance. I reached into my folder and pulled out the one thing I hadn't shown yet: a notarized letter from the hospice nurse, the one who admitted someone came with a bribe to falsify the discharge report. I laid it in front of him. He glanced at it, but didn't touch it. "It wasn't supposed to go that far," he said. That line, "it wasn't supposed to go that far." A line that always came too late, after the damage was done and the dead buried. "Your grandson deserves to know the truth," I said. "Not just mine, all of it." Charles shifted in his chair, visibly older now. I could see it, shame hollowing him out from the inside. "So tell him," I added. "Tell him who paid for his school, tell him where the money came from, and tell him why his mother had to live like a fugitive while you poured champagne over charity galas in her name." The room fell into silence again, but this time it wasn't stillness, it was reckoning. That night, Charles gathered the whole family in the estate's library. My son sat beside me, face unreadable, while Charles stood by the fireplace, gripping the mantel like it was the only thing holding him upright. He didn't read a statement, he spoke plain and slow. Admitted the fraud, admitted the cover-up, admitted the manipulation of my supposed death for a 7-figure insurance payout that had quietly financed the family's rise from decline. I watched my son's face as each sentence dropped. He didn't blink. He didn't cry. He just stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. When it was over, Charles turned to him and said, "You were never meant to carry this, but your mother, she bore it all. For you." We left that night in silence. No one tried to stop us. No one dared. Outside, the night was cool and clear, and for the first time in years, I felt like the ground beneath my feet wasn't borrowed. Back at our small apartment, I boiled water for tea while my son sat at the table, flipping through the documents I'd once hidden from him. He looked up. "So what happens now?" he asked. I poured the tea and said, "Now we live, not as ghosts, not as secrets, just us, finally." Weeks passed. The story hit the press. I didn't leak it, but someone did. And when they came knocking, I told them everything. Not out of vengeance, but because silence was the weapon they used, and I was done being unarmed. We received calls, threats, and offers. I ignored them all. We didn't need money, we needed dignity, and we had that now. My son applied for college under his real name, no longer the heir of a ghost fund. I took a part-time job at the community center, teaching women how to fight paper with paper, not fists, not fear. Just the quiet power of a name reclaimed. One evening, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was the pocket watch Charles had given me all those years ago. Taped to the back was a note. "You were always real. You always will be. Forgive me if you can. C." I stared at the note for a long time. I didn't know if forgiveness was possible, but I knew I wouldn't let him take any more space in my life, no more than a watch on a shelf, ticking in a room filled with light and laughter. Some nights I still wake and sweat, thinking I'm back in that alley with rain soaking through my coat and no name to call my own. But then I hear my son in the kitchen making cereal or humming an off-key tune while brushing his teeth, and I remember we made it. We crossed through fire and came out the other side. I may have been erased once, but I rewrote myself in ink too bold to fade. So if you're hearing this now, my dear ones, know this. You are not what they say about you. You are what you survive, what you build back from ash. And somewhere out there, someone will hear your story and find their own breath again, just like I did, just like we did. I am Rokhaya, 60 years old, and after losing everything I thought defined me, my marriage, my home, even my name, I learned the most powerful truth of all. You are not what others discard. You are what you choose to rise from. For too long, I let silence shape my story. But the moment I stopped hiding, I discovered something stronger than pain: dignity. I may have been erased from the headlines, but I reclaimed my place in my son's eyes and in my own heart. The past will always echo, but now I no longer whisper. I speak for myself and for every woman who was told to disappear quietly. If Rokhaya's story moved you, don't forget to like this video. It lets more women hear stories they might need right now. Subscribe so you never miss another tale of survival, betrayal, healing, and hope. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like someone tried to erase your worth? How did you find your way back? We read every comment, and your voice matters more than you think. Thank you deeply for being here. Until next time, take care of your truth and never stop choosing yourself.